Well, you just heard me mention Tout, monde, parle with David, and last night both the Liberal and Conservative leaders did appear on the popular Quebec program, not together, but on the same night, beginning with Pierre Poilievre.
Un changement.
Now, the Conservative leader was immediately asked about his bad polling numbers, about comparisons to Donald Trump, and why, despite the smiles last night, there were times he came off abrasive. And as for the Liberal leader, he was quizzed on Quebec culture, how he was any different than Justin Trudeau, and what he thought about Quebec's secularism law. Well, to take us through what happened last night and the impact it might have on the Quebec campaign, we're now joined by Martine St-Victor, General Manager at Edelman Montreal, and Chris Nardi, Parliamentary Reporter for the National Post. Hello to both of you.
Hello.
Hello.
So, appearing on Tout, monde, parle essentially is a rite of passage now in any Quebec campaign. We see it last night. It may surprise people outside Quebec at just how tough the questions can be, given the fact this is also a show where they're often sharing a glass of wine. But, there were some tough questions last night. So, Chris, beginning with Pierre Poilievre, what do you think the Conservative campaign was hoping to achieve with this appearance last night?
So I think one of the things is that they wanted to show that Pierre Poilievre speaks very good French, that he can communicate with Quebecers, communicate better than Mark Carney, whose French is still decently arduous. I'm sure we'll talk about it. But also show that he's doesn't have to be the attack dog that he really became known for the 2 years that he led the Conservative Party leading up to this election. The very intense, aggressive, always on the attack Pierre Poilievre kind of disappeared for this show. And what we got was a more subdued, affable, almost, quite frankly, looked comfortable, which was surprising to me because this is not a setting in which he would normally be super comfortable, and basically just trying to connect with Quebec voters. The idea for the Conservatives here is that they want to make gains in Quebec. They currently sit at more or less 23%, but there's still a good 20 points behind the Liberals in Quebec. And for them, the idea is that they want to make gains around the Quebec City region. They want to entrench their support, and there's room for growth for the Conservative Party in the province if they can play their cards right, but it has been historically very difficult. So that was certainly something that Pierre Poilievre was set out to do on Sunday evening.
Okay, so if they play their cards right, and Quebecers have raised concerns about the way Monsieur Poilievre approaches certain issues and certain debate. So Martine, in terms of your assessment, given what the party wanted to achieve last night on the program, do you think they were able to do it?
I think the number one objective is do no harm for both candidates, which means no mistakes, nothing that's going to set them back. I think context is important. Tout, monde, parle is 1 million+ viewers, where you're surrounded with actors from different spheres. So you have to be able to understand Quebec culture, go back and forth, and both candidates, Mr. Poilievre certainly achieved that. I agree with Chris that he showed a more approachable side. He did answer some tough questions like defunding the CBC versus Radio-Canada, the differences between Donald Trump and him. And he did show a side that was more, less politician, more human. So in that sense, he achieved what he set out to do. Now, in context as well, Mr. Singh was on the show last week, and he did very well. We did not see the numbers change in Quebec, despite the performance on the show. Next week will be Mr. Blanchet. So again, what you don't want is to make mistakes, and you want, if the objective of these types of interviews as well is, in case somebody hasn't been following the campaign, then it's an opportunity for an elector to see a different side of the candidate. So in that sense, it was a success.
Mm-hmm. And what about Mr. Carney? Because you noted it, Chris. His French is not strong. We all know that going into last night. His French is not as strong as Monsieur Poilievre's. What do you think he was able to accomplish last night?
Well, I think, as Martine just brilliantly said, is that for both leaders, but especially for Mark Carney, it was about maintaining his party's 20-point lead in the polls, not basically falling flat on his face, making an egregious French mistake like, as we know, he did during the Liberal leadership French debate, where he mistakenly said, we all agree with Hamas instead of on Hamas. And I think he generally avoided doing that. He wasn't necessarily as clear as any of the other guests, quite frankly, on the show, but he didn't face plant. He was there to kind of project the same Mark Carney that we've seen throughout the campaign as, a businessman who's managed crises at the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, and who is ready to do the same with Donald Trump, but just generally also try to show Quebecers that he understands their realities and can speak to them. I don't know how successfully he answered the last question that the host, Guillaume Lepage, put to him, which was, what do you know about Quebec? Tell us something you like. Name a cheese, name an artist or something. He kind of sidestepped that one. Again, I'm not sure that this will have a dramatic impact on the campaign necessarily, but I don't think he really showed that he is a Montrealer or a Quebecer or someone who fundamentally understands the province on a cultural level. But I don't think he face planted either. And quite frankly, I think that's what they were really going for as a preparation for this week's French language debate.
Martine, what do you make of Mr. Carney's performance and what he did last night? Because again, his French is not as strong, and I think outside Quebec, people do wonder how that's going to ultimately affect the Quebec vote.
Well, about the French, it's important, again, to put it in context. There's a CBC Radio-Canada journalist who said a couple of weeks ago that when he speaks of Mr. Carney's French, he actually hears from viewers who say, lay off of his French. It's good enough for us. Move on to something else. So it's not as much of it's not as much as a big deal as everybody's trying to make of it. And also, he was very modest yesterday. He said, I know my French is not perfect. I know my answers are too long. I'm doing my best. And the reality is that this is what we want in Quebec. Somebody is going to make the effort. We also understand that he speaks it well enough to be able to explain to us what he's going to do about the tariffs, which is the number one question. The number one issue to deal with. And also, he did show that he understood Quebec culture. He was asked about a singer that he appreciates. And also, you could tell that he knew he had a deficit because since the beginning of the campaign, there has been kind of this sense that he didn't understand Quebec culture or did not appreciate it enough or didn't emphasize it enough. But I thought yesterday he came off very well. And again, that modesty can go a long way. And he answered the tough questions about Brookfield, about other issues as well, the fact that he's not a politician, the fact that he's been taking breaks from the campaign. So again, do no harm. No harm was done. Is it going to add to his lead? I'm not sure, but at least I don't think he lost any electors yesterday.
Okay, listen, I only have about 30 seconds left, so Martine, I'm going to ask it of you because we talk about the importance of Tout, monde, parle. Was last night's appearance more important than the French language debate, or are we going to see more emphasis on the French language debate in terms of people making up their minds in Quebec? And sorry, it has to be a quick answer.
Yeah, so I'll tell you something that the Liberal Party is doing extremely well, and they did that after the interview on RDI 2 weeks ago, which is they extract parts of the interview and then they share it on social media immediately after the interview. They do it with English subtitles and they do it with French subtitles, which is great because the reality, although it's 1 million+ viewers, not everybody watches Tout, monde, parle, and it's an opportunity to reach electors outside of Quebec. And they did that last night. It was very efficient communication. So in that sense, it was a success.
Okay. Well, of course, the French language debate coming up in a couple of days. But for now, Martine, very nice to meet you and speak with you. Chris, I look forward to seeing you back in Ottawa, my friend. Thank you for this evening.
Thank you. Have a good night.